Good afternoon. Well, I'm very delighted to be here for a few reasons. I'm delighted to see such a packed crowd of women into leadership in the civil service, and I'm delighted to be speaking about the subject that I've been asked to talk about around culture and the need for a change in culture. How do we develop the change in culture that we need? I hope you've had a very interesting day so far. I did see from the program that you had a number of breakout sessions and lots of interesting training, it seemed, around how to speak up, how to command a room, how to manage difficult situations, how to network. But in my experience, all the training in the world, while it's incredibly important, is not going to be enough if our organizations and our departments that we work in don't have the right culture that is conducive to our progression. In my recent book, I promise you it's not really a plug, but it's just I had to refer to a story that I tell in that, a tale of two career women. And the first has a good start to her career. She goes off to New York for a couple of years. She's kind of regarded as a high flyer, and she puts in the hours, really all the hours that she's been given in life. And then she returns from her maternity leave, having had her first child, age 25, and is passed over for promotion. Asks her boss what did she need to do differently to get it next year, and he says, oh, there's nothing wrong with your performance, but there is some doubt over your commitment with a baby. The other woman has 5 children, joined her organization a few years before, is a decade older, and although she joined in a very junior capacity, within 7 years she becomes the chief executive. Now, both of those women were me. And I know that in the first organization, whatever I did and however well I was prepared, the culture was not conducive to my success. And in the second organization, I obviously had a completely different experience. So I know firsthand just how important it is. Now, one of the things that I'm doing these days is to try to encourage greater diversity, including but not limited to gender diversity, in my own industry, the investment and savings industry. And we are woefully behind on every metric. We have only 10% women in fund management. We have 1% Black British. Basically, we don't even know where we stand on some of the other dimensions of diversity. For the last couple of years, I've asked the audience at our flagship Diversity Project seminar what they think is the single biggest impediment to greater progress on diversity in the fund management industry. And actually, the third seminar was just last week. So I am very hot off the press in terms of how they responded. And you can see there's a range of options. And each year, the majority or the single biggest choice from the audience, and it's about 400 people in the fund management industry, ranging from apprentices through to chief executives, they have chosen culture. And there has been a progression. In 2016, it was 32% voted culture. In 2017, 41%. And 2017, just last week, over half, 51%, said that culture was our biggest impediment. And this is after, obviously, a lot of soul-searching post the financial crisis, a lot of realization that actually we need to change a lot of things about how not just the investment industry, but the financial services industry operated. So it's a bit of a sad reflection, really, but it shows that there is a growing awareness, at least, of the importance of culture. Now, again, thinking of my own industry, although I have had and enjoyed a better experience myself, I think that a lot of the time, the approach to diversity, and particularly gender diversity, has been something along the lines of this. Hopefully you can all see it. So you have, in this case, it looks like an ethnic minority woman being interviewed by a group of, well, it looks like the Matrix character, Agent Smith, doesn't it? I particularly like the guy over on the right-hand corner. He looks so bored he's going to fall off his chair, which you sort of hope he would. And there's a sort of sense of perplexity about their quizzing the lady, describe what you can bring to this company. Diversity has been seen more about tolerance, about forbearance, about political correctness, rather than actually improving the way we think, and particularly the cultures of our organizations. Now, actually, I have to confess, I posted this on Twitter. It's originally from Private Eye, and someone pointed out, and it's a good catch, they said, well, you're making a big assumption. They said, she might be interviewing them. Which I loved the thought of, but I wasn't too confident that that was what the cartoonist meant. Now, I come with some rays of hope, some good news stories, because as has already been mentioned, Having founded the 30% Club in 2010, I have seen firsthand that change is possible. And what happened with the 30% Club was almost like the perfect storm, really. We had obviously the big, loud, deafening wake-up call in the form of the financial crisis in 2008. And as the dust settled, there was a realization that having just one type of person, and not just all men, but a certain type of man that often worked together, had close social relationships with each other, had been educated similarly, that having that one type of person constituting the vast majority of boards could not possibly be the optimal result, and particularly when it came to overseeing culture in a bank. So there was a moment of opportunity there, and we went in a few short years, really, from 12.5% women on boards in 2010 to frustratingly close. We're now at 29.1%, and it's going to inch up by 0.1, I think, every few months that it's measured, until finally, I hope we get there. But what was interesting to me was actually the fact that this was achieved not by women talking amongst each other, but actually by involving men. And I suppose what I learned principally from this positive experience was actually if we wanted real change, we certainly had to involve those in power. We could talk ourselves about the problems that we were encountering, but we couldn't solve things on our own. Now, at this stage, I have to say, I think it's a moment, a bit of a turning point or an inflection point for the whole subject of diversity as well as cultures in our organization. Because a decade on, and obviously we are marking 10 years since the global financial crisis, I think since we've moved on from that real sort of crisis moment, diversity has become a little bit of a fatigued subject. And yet, of course, it's not one that we have mastered. I think it's still seen as a special interest issue, more about as a problem to solve rather than actually a solution to creating better organizations and better cultures in those organizations. It is still, and I say this very conscious that I'm talking to a room full of women, women talking to women about women's issues, which can make us feel more confident and we can share our experiences, but it won't, as I say, by itself change the system. Often we resort as well to quite simplistic training and we make it mandatory, and that ends up causing a bit of resentment. And I think we have to call out the fact that at this stage, people feel they've done a lot, organizations and companies, and I'm very familiar with some of the very rich programs that the civil service does, and you do an awful lot already to further diversity and inclusion, and yet sometimes the results seem to disappoint compared with the efforts. So we have this bit of a dilemma at present that diversity fatigue has set in before we've really achieved the results, before you have all made it to the top. And yet, of course, I'm not a quitter. I don't think now's the time to in any way sort of sit back and sort of wish things were different. I do think we need to be considering gender equality now being a mix of two things. It's a mix of women's progressions into leadership roles, and it's also about men changing what they aspire to and what it means to be a successful man in today's world. Now, I'm foreshadowing it. Tomorrow, the Business in the Community's Gender Equality campaign that I chair is publishing a new piece of work called Equal Lives that is particularly looking at men's perspectives. I know the last panel touched a little bit on caring. And what this has asked is men, and over 10,000 responses have been received, some from women, but we particularly wanted to hear from men. And this is men who have careers and caring responsibilities, whether they be fathers or whether they be looking after, say, elderly or ill parents. And it's very interesting that actually they report that they want to, more than half of them say they want to play a bigger role in the caring side, but they feel culturally that they're not really able to do so, that actually they don't feel that their organizations, even if they have the policies that would really not so much tolerate it, they would, but whether it would be compatible with developing their careers. So I think at this stage we need new thinking if we're going to push on the culture and to try and make more of a change from where we are today. We'll achieve incremental progress, I think, and I applaud you for having a day like today. I think that's fantastic, but I don't think we'll be able to really push through and make that leap of change towards true gender equality. We need, and this is a quote from Albert Einstein, as you can see from the picture of him in the corner there, that just as we saw in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis, there's a realization that you can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. The thing is, it's a bit chicken and egg. You need some of the women involved to come up with that new ways of thinking. So at the moment, I think there is a gap in many organizations between public and organizational processes and policies and what we actually do. There is a reality gap. So how can we change this? Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize that there's a bit of a sort of sticking point, and that is that we human beings like to talk to people that we agree with. So there isn't really a lot of appetite to listen to people who are a bit different to us. And this is a conversation on Twitter, or a series of conversations of Twitter. It's analysis by a scientific organization of discussions not about diversity, but about climate change. And actually, it's a similar pattern, whatever the subject that you refer to. So the green blobs are the people who believe in climate change, thinks it's happening, are actively trying to prevent climate change. The red people are the skeptics who just think it's, well, along the lines of Donald Trump's comments sometimes when he talks about this sort of being a fabrication. And then there's one or two, I think you can spot them if you look really closely, yellow dots for people who are ambiguous or black who and they're not sure about where they stand. But you'll see the clusters. And this is the problem that we have in so much of our attempts to really shake up the cultures and to really, I think, overhaul how we operate in our organizations, that we tend to talk to each other. And so I think, without being too harsh about it, we have created something of a delusion around diversity. And what we've been doing is trying to focus very much on identity diversity. You know, do we have women? Do we have ethnic minority? Do we have people of different sexual orientation and different abilities? And actually what we need to be doing to persuade people who are a bit skeptical still of the subject, we don't drop those efforts, but we reorient them to think more about how do you improve the collective intelligence of your organization or your team. I commend you to something called the Heterodox Academy. I have nothing to do with it in the sense that I'm not on commission to advertise them, but it's actually a really interesting thing to look up. It's a group of academics who, in an attempt to somewhat push back against the sense of, certain opinions not being allowed at some of our most prestigious universities around the world, are professors who all sign up to a pledge to encourage viewpoint diversity in their classrooms and in their analysis. Now, you may think that none of this applies to you. You might think, well, I'm already a very liberal thinker. I like to solicit lots of views. And I'd suggest one challenge to you. This is not something that I made up myself. I have to give credit to Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, who talked about a recruitment challenge. Imagine you have two candidates for a job. Let's call them candidate A and B. And you set them both an aptitude test that is based on the things you think you need to achieve from this hire. One candidate A scores 8 out of 10, and candidate B only scores 4 out of 10. Now, I think most of us, assuming that both A and B are quite personable, would almost automatically appoint candidate A to the job. They did better on the test. But what if, and this is the challenge to us all, what if your existing team also took the test, the team that this person would be joining, and they scored 8 out of 10, and none of them could get right the two answers that out of only 4, candidate B managed to score correctly. Candidate B is the person who brings something new to your team or your organization. But how many of us, in all honesty, recruit for the team? We don't. We say this is the best candidate for the job. I mean, the number of discussions I've had about whether we're trying to positively discriminate towards women because we want to encourage more women to apply. We're not. We're actually just improving the collective thinking that we have together. So I think we actually need a cultural overhaul. We don't need to have just a set of policies around diversity. We need to be thinking about how do we modernize our workplaces, yes, so that they're equipped to deal with the challenges as well as the opportunities of technology, but actually so that we think better, so we think more creatively, so we think in a more caring way, which isn't the way that people are approaching diversity or progression of women. And right now, I think we have new impetus for change. I think the case for urgency is becoming marked again. We went through this journey, I think, since the global financial crisis, certainly in my own experience, working in that financial industry and working within a very male-dominated sector, that actually there was a sort of sense of urgency that there'd never been before. Of course, it wasn't the only thing that bothered everybody. The first and foremost, everyone wanted to shore up the financial system, which was the right thing to do. But then, as I say, the dust settled and there was a sense of what lessons learned. But then, of course, we go back to our old habits. And that's the phase I think we've been in the last couple of years. But I do think with digital age and disruptive age that we need to think how we work differently. We need to think about how the nature of power and leadership is changing. You work often according to what you're told to by government, and clearly, again, you're seeing how there's a disruption around what it is to have power. And today, I think, good leaders understand the need to connect with people, that they realize they can't just tell people what to do, that a job title doesn't guarantee you respect. And then we have the pressure from young people. Now, I have a lot of children. We'll get this out the way because it comes up at some point in the conversation. So I have 9 children, 6 girls, 3 boys. I say that like it's perfectly normal. And I see my older ones, and my oldest 2 are married, and they obviously have friends, so it's not just my own family. And I do speak at a lot of universities, business schools, and schools. And the young men or boys, they expect quite a different outcome in their lives than, say, their fathers and certainly their grandfathers. Whereas my generation, even though we talk all about this stuff, we are still working pretty much like our parents did. I'm 52. I tend to go to the office on the same commute. I sit at the same desk. And of course, I work a little bit more from home, but that really, I use technology to enable me to work harder, to be honest, rather than to work more smartly. And I think that the most successful organizations are going to address this if they're going to be able to attract the best and brightest young talent of any sort. And as I say, amongst the sort of avant-garde thinking or the cutting-edge thinking, diversity is now understood to mean improving the creativity, improving the decision-making with their teams. So just as I'd set up a 30% club, in some ways what we need, though, to achieve this is not just one effort, because clearly there are multiple things that go behind the culture of an organization. We sort of need a program about culture. I wanted to sort of spend a couple of minutes on leadership in connection with how do you help to set the challenge, set up the course of your organization in the right way. Now, I've mentioned a couple of characteristics about effective leadership today, and I know you're interested in becoming leaders, or you are leaders already. And I think this is an area which really plays into women's strengths. And I think we can play a bigger contribution. As I say, I realize it's a bit chicken and egg, but I realize as I became more senior, I was able to set the parameters of the teams that work for me and to provide leadership in my own way, not in perhaps a stereotypical command and control way. And I think effective leaders today are inclusive. They do invite challenge. They do encourage people, and they themselves ask for help. I think best leaders today are collaborative and empathetic. They know how to listen, and to listen often to the quietest voices in the room. They are accessible and humble. They see past their own job title and recognize that they don't have the mandate to lead unless they bring people with them. And they're courageous. We live in an era of great change, and it does take courage to stick your neck out, to go against perhaps the opinions of the consensus. But it is an exciting time because often these characteristics are found in women. And of course, I'm not saying men can't have them too. And it's become bizarrely controversial to say that, on average, women are a little bit different than men. But I think there is, I would like to point to my own scientific experiment of having those 9 children, and I feel I have enough of a sample size to be quite authoritative on this topic, that the girls have tended to behave a little differently, certainly emotionally, and how they connect with people. And ideally, we have us both. And that makes for the strongest teams. I was delighted recently that Citywire has done an analysis, it's their 3rd year of doing it, on women in fund management. It's called Alpha Female. And it's a bit of a sobering read usually because, it inches up, if you're lucky, by sort of 0.1% from a very low base. But actually this year, and they've just released their latest report, they had, the main story was on the better performance achieved by mixed gender teams. And obviously you can fight it and you can say, no, we're all just the same, but actually my argument is that diversity is incredibly powerful, and that will be the answer to improving our cultures of our organisations. I had to show you this because I love it so much. I have been gracious enough and put supermen as well on there for the avoidance of any doubt that I'm not saying women are better than men, but we are a little different. And I would encourage you all, as you embark on whatever stage you are in your career, to never submerge your own differences. I know that was a theme of the previous panel, but if we're going to make the most of diversity, then we have to encourage each other to think a little differently. So a couple of things just to conclude, and I'm very happy to take questions on any of these subjects, but I see diversity as part of the solution to today's issues, not another problem to solve. I urge you to contribute to new ways of working, not to sit back and think it's somebody else's job to change the culture. We can all have an impact, and don't lean into old ways when things are happening that aren't right, particularly as we embrace inclusivity, then don't just take it. I do think we need to aim higher, that we need to aim for true equality and to think about both women's progression and how men can play a bigger part in some other areas of our lives. And also, of course, we tend to worry about all the problems ourselves, and we look back on some of the things that might not have gone right in our own careers. And I've learned, again, through good and bad experience, that actually it's very important to focus on writing the future. And finally, I want to encourage you to believe that you can make a difference. This is my favorite quote of all time, and I did cite it the other day when I spoke at DIT, so I hope that some of you aren't hearing it again and thinking, oh no, not that one again. But anyway, I think it's a very powerful one, and it's certainly how I try to live my own life. I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I will not let what I cannot do interfere with what I can do. Thank you.